Hello and welcome back to another episode on this wonderful YouTube channel. Last week we covered, what did we cover last week? It was my favorite exercises to grow each muscle. Tremendous. I hope you saw great value in that. Now this week I want to cover some of the biggest barriers that you might be experiencing if you're struggling to build muscle. I have written them down, so I might reference those during this video. Actually, I'm going to have to reference them, so give me a second. Got it, got my phone. Right, let's see what we got. So, yeah, I want to run through what I think, over my years as a coach, the sort of things that I've observed with clients and individuals that are the main barriers that are preventing you from building muscle. Okay? First one is lack of training intensity. I think this is a very common barrier. People are going to the gym, they're just going through the motions, they're doing their reps, they're doing their sets, they're going, they're coming, but those sets aren't really of any high intensity. They're not challenging. And as we know, if the working sets aren't challenging, then it's not going to cause any adaptations to occur, right? A lot of people are going to the gym and they're performing reps that fall under the category of junk volume. Junk volume is basically reps and sets that do not really attribute to any substantial change in your body, right? Sets and reps that don't challenge you enough to cause adaptations to occur. By the end of a set, you should be fucking grateful that that set is over. When I'm doing any exercise, a back squat, a pull-up, a bench press, a machine chest press, whatever it is, by the end of it, I'm like, God, thank fuck that is over, and I'm just enjoying the rest period. But so many people, are just in their rest periods, they're doing other things like push-ups and sit-ups. If you've got the capacity to do a push-up or a sit-up after you've just, done a set of back squats or whatnot, you're not training hard enough, right? Obviously, I've done a video a few weeks ago about the RPE scale. I won't go too much into detail about that, but you can go back and check it out if you want more of an insight into training intensity. But I think single-handedly, the main reason that most people don't build enough muscle is the lack of training intensity, and basically everyone just performing junk volume in the gym with no sets or minimal sets actually contributing to the causation of adaptations. Tremendous. What do we got next? Let me get my phone. Not enough. Okay. Now next is not enough training volume, I think. So obviously we've got two focuses when you're trying to build muscle in the gym, or programming your workouts at least, right? Intensity, and training volume, right? Now training volume is obviously the reps and the sets, right? The intensity, like we just discussed, is how hard you're pushing yourself, the load that you're using. Now training volume, I think people are in the gym for long enough. People spend hours in the gym, but are they actually using that time efficiently? You know what I mean? So from a volume perspective, the last time I read into it anyway, the data suggests that 10 to 20 working sets per muscle group per week is what is needed to build muscle, right? If you are a beginner, then you're probably going to start closer to the bottom end of that scale, 10 working sets per muscle group per week. If you're more of an advanced trainer, then, you're probably going to go slightly higher, right? 15 to 20 working sets per muscle group per week. But again, it all sort of correlates to how intensely you're training. If you do 3, intense sets on your chest, for example, with an RPE of 9 to 10, you're going to be pretty exhausted, and the sort of, your capacity to do more sets on your chest is going to be minimal. So, this is a bit of a multifaceted issue here. But yeah, generally speaking, people not doing enough working sets, right? 10 to 20 working sets per muscle group per week is what the data suggests is optimal. People might go to the gym, do maybe 2 sets on the chest press, 2 sets on the shoulder press, you know what I mean? Maybe a few curls. They just sort of wander around doing things sort of randomly, which contributes to the lack of volume and also coincides with the lack of intensity that I just mentioned. All right, so remember that 10 to 20 working sets per muscle group per week is what the data suggests is optimal for growth. But that does, you also need to be training with enough intensity, very important. Otherwise, those sets are just going to fall into the junk volume that I mentioned previously. All right, next, what do we got? Poor exercise. Okay, poor exercise selection. I think this is something that recently has I notice more and more in the gym. I'm not sure if it's because of Instagram and everyone's just trying these random fucking exercises on Instagram that influencers are posting just to get some clout. I'm not sure. But people are sort of weirdly moving away from the OG movements, you know, the bench press, the deadlift, the squat, right? And they're trying all this fucking weird shit just because they think it's better for building muscle. I don't know. But most of the big people that you know, that you see on Instagram, myself, I built my body just doing the basic movements, the seated rows, you know, the pull downs, the bench presses, the squats, the hack squats, you know. So I think when you're sort of, you know, selecting exercises to put into your routine, you know, don't be looking for some crazy shit. Just stick to the basics because the basics work. You know, I use a lot of you probably don't know rugby, but if you do know rugby, you know, the New Zealand national rugby union team, the All Blacks, are the most successful sport team in the history of the world, out of any sport, right? They're sort of, I think their overall win rate is above 90%, which is astounding, right? But look, they do the basics really well, really, really, really well. You know, they drill the basics, they do those things, you know, week in, week out, and then that allows them to build off of that, right? And, you know, the reason I'm using that as an analogy is because the basics work. The basics is what is going to get you to where you want to be. So instead of trying to select these random, stupid fucking exercises that you've seen on Instagram, you know, just do the boring, basic shit, right? When it comes to exercise selection, because it works. And all the big guys that you follow on Instagram that are showing you these random new movements, they built the bodies that they have just doing the boring, basic movements. Don't forget that. Right? Now, next, I'm actually adding this one in. I didn't write it down. Is exercise execution. Right? Now, exercise execution is your form, basically, how you're performing the movement, the tempo, the range of motion, your body position. Now, again, most people in the gym cannot train for shit. Their exercise execution is diabolical. They're loading up the weight far too heavy. Their range of motion is, you know, just sucks. So, you know, and I know it's hard for everyone. The best way to improve your exercise execution really is to get a good coach to coach you, right? Understand how you should move, your biomechanics. But, you know, if you're going to the gym and you're training with optimal intensity, you're training with enough volume, you've selected the right exercises, but your form is shit, that's really, really going to hamper your progress. You know what I mean? I can't stress that enough. So I think, you know, learning how to move your body, something I used to do in a gym that I worked in years ago in Sydney was called, it was sort of like a short course called the Movement Fundamentals. And that taught me how to sort of move efficiently, right? Understand biomechanics, the different movement patterns. And when you understand that, it really does help you apply that to the exercises that you're doing, right? And you can really think about the muscles that you're targeting, right? You understand where these muscles sort of attach onto your body. Therefore, you know how to sort of position your frame in an efficient position to target those muscles. So exercise execution, right? The best way to improve that is to get a coach. I think you can watch videos online as well, but yeah, if you're not performing the movements correctly, if you're not positioning your body in an optimal position to isolate the muscle, then, you know, the stimulus is just going to be, you know, sort of quite sprayed out as opposed to just on one single muscle, which is what we're looking for. All right. And then lastly is, this is a good one, right? Is shitty lifestyles with poor sleep hygiene and routine, you know, like, again, you can do all of the perfect things. Go to the gym, best exercise selection, best exercise execution, you know, optimal intensity, enough volume. But if you just have a shitty lifestyle where you're, you know, filling your body with processed food, you're, you know, going out drinking every night, you're smoking, you're sleeping 3 hours, you're like, it's just going to ruin your progress. You know, like when you're trying to get in shape, it is a sort of holistic lifestyle, you know, and I think that's why a lot of people fail, is because they want to live these, you know, I don't want to say extravagant lives, but they, you know, they want to burn the candle at both ends type thing, right? They want to have a body like a Greek god, you know, which is crafted through discipline and consistency, and they want to go out and be the party animal and, you know, be at all these social events. And if you look at your, you know, your favorite influencers, or take me as an example, right? I live a pretty boring lifestyle. I travel a lot, yes, I go to different countries, but generally speaking, you know, I'm not going out eating in all these, you know what I mean? Like I eat the same foods. I don't drink very much, to be honest, not anymore. You know what I mean? Like my sleep routine is like sacred to me, you know? So I think this is something a lot of people struggle to wrap their head around. Their head around is that if you want to have a really good physique, a physique that really stands out from the crowd, you've got to live a pretty boring lifestyle, I think, you know? But depends how you define boring. I like my lifestyle, but I like to live a sort of quite slow, you know, quiet, slow sort of day-to-day routine, right? You know, I get my enjoyment out of things like going surfing, reading a book, you know what I mean? Getting all of my work done, coaching my clients, you know what I mean? So for me, like, I'm quite happy living that quiet, simple life, which allows me to really focus on building a better physique. So I think improving overall lifestyle, you know, making it more sustainable to actually enhance how you look is very, very important. Because as I said, you can do all of the previous things that I've just mentioned, but if your lifestyle sucks and your sleep sucks, your progress is going to be pretty average. Okay? So to summarize, the 5 main barriers, I think, that are holding people back from building muscle: training intensity, training volume, exercise selection, exercise execution, and shitty lifestyles. All right? You probably noticed that I didn't mention too much about nutrition. You know, because generally speaking, people, when it comes to building muscle, right, people are eating enough food. You know, people eat enough. It's quite easy to eat enough protein now with protein shakes, and you know what I mean? So generally speaking, when I work with people, they're eating enough food, they're eating enough protein. You know what I mean? They're sort of covering the nutritional side of things to build, right? They might have a bit more fat than they want, but you know, we're not speaking about getting lean here. We're speaking about building muscle. So nutritionally, that's never usually a barrier. People can quite easily eat enough protein, and people very easily eat enough calories, right? You don't have to, you know, push people to do that. So I think really looking at what you're doing in the gym, if you're struggling to build muscle, in line with the points that I've just mentioned, you know, could help you to sort of reassess and go, right, am I training with enough intensity? Am I training with enough volume? Am I selecting the right exercises, etc.? I hope this video helps. Any questions, let me know. But yeah, the best way to fix all of those boxes is to get a coach, and I am a pretty good one. So if you want to chat, you know where to find me. All right.